Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. I'm going to give you a rundown and a tutorial on how to use the Vampire Computer People's Smoke Show Visualizer, open source and built with Unity. So the first thing you're going to want to do is install Unity, and once you have that, you can go ahead to the repo and download a zip of the repository. You can clone or download and then click download zip. Alright, yeah, and once you have that downloaded, you can go ahead and open up the repo, and you'll find most of everything we're going to be working with is going to be here in this assets folder. And then from there, you're going to go to scenes and double click main.unity. So Unity's going to launch. This might take a little while depending upon how powerful your machine is. There's a few assets that have to get loaded up and stuff like that. So just going to have to be patient and let it load for a sec. Alright, cool. So we're in. So the first thing you might want to do is just hit play, and you can go ahead and see Smoke Show in action. It might take a second to render once all the assets are loaded up, but then you'll see it get into action here. Now you can see as the music's playing, the static is really present, and as it disappears, the static disappears. So the transparency and the opacity of the elements are all driven based on the amplitude of the various frequency bands that you're selecting to work off of. So you're going to want to take a look at the hierarchy here in Unity. This is where we're going to be keeping all of our elements. And they're really divided into two categories. Background elements are sort of static. They won't change with the music or react in any sort of way. And then there's the music reactive elements, which, as the name suggests, will react to music. And I'll kind of demonstrate that here in a second. Right now, all we have is one of each. We have a city element, so when you press play here, that's the background of the city here that's animating. And then we have our static pattern, which is the static you see that's reacting to the music as we go in. Important thing to note, as we select things here in the hierarchy, you'll see them over here in the inspector, given focus. We're using this Animate tiled texture script to perform all of our animations. So actually, you'll need a collection of images or an array of images in order to make your animations rather than a traditional video. We might add video support in the future, but for various reasons I won't get into here about the alpha channel with videos. That's not really the way it's going right now. So you'll want a collection of images which will make up your animation. You might use a tool like FFmpeg to split your video into an array of images. It's a pretty easy tool to use, or you might use something like ImageMagick or Photoshop. There's a lot of different ways that you can take a video or an animated GIF and break it down into individual frames, but that's what you're going to want to be doing here. So yeah, this Animate tiled texture script is how we perform our animations. The array of images go into this frames category here, and then you can set the frames per second here as well, and that'll determine how quickly the animation goes. So you can swap between your elements as it's playing live, and I'll demonstrate that in a second when we go ahead and make some new ones. But if you want to make a new one, what you'll do is you will click the element that you want to duplicate. So in this case, I want to make a new background. So I've selected here, and I press Control D, and that will make a duplicate. What I like to do is give my name something descriptive, and then do an underscore and a letter or number depending upon which key it's going to be mapped to on the keyboard. And you can see how we do that here. We have a script that's a dictionary, and it's called Key to Index Dictionaries. Just let Visual Studio load up here. And so you'll see what I've done is mapped index positions starting with 0 all the way to 29 to various keys. And that's sort of how we swap between elements. So all the music reactive elements are between numbers or keys 1 on the left of your keyboard all the way to 9 to 0, and it starts again wrapping around with Q through T. So these are all, you have all these available to add music reactive elements. And then for your backgrounds, you start with the letter Y on your keyboard, moving all the way to P, and then wrapping again with A all the way to the semicolon for all your background elements. So you have all these available. So you'll see if we want a new background, we take our city element and we've duplicated it. In my case, I'm going to pull up some images that I set aside, and I have some images of a witch's eye that we can use as a background here. So what I'm going to do first We'll give this a name like, instead of city element, we'll call it I. And then instead of underscore Y, we'll do underscore U. It's the next key over to the right that is available for backgrounds. So we've selected this IU, and you'll want to go ahead and change your frame size to 0 for now, because we'll be adding more. And eventually you're going to want to change that frames per second. Now there's this another important script called the triggerable element script. This is going to be what allows us to swap between elements. And as you add new ones, it's important to do a couple different things. First, so you see how the index element for city element was 15. If you look, that's because it's a background, and we'll make it the first one with 15, and it's mapped to Y. So our next one, we're going to want it to be 16, and then we'll know it's mapped to U. So what we're going to want to do here is set the index of element to 16, and then we're going to want to make the state inactive, because to begin, it's not going to be active. Only one element per collection, one per background, one per music reactive element can be active at one time. So you'll see that active by default is our city element, and then inactive, number 16 here, is our I element. We'll go ahead and do the same thing with our music reactive pattern. So it's very similar style here. You'll see that the index of this element is 0. Remember, this is a music reactive element, and so it's mapped to key 1. It's our first one. The next one will want to have an index position of 1, and it'll be mapped to key 2. So go ahead and click here, press Control D to make a copy. And for this one, instead of an I, I'm just going to put this into list mode. We're going to use an image of a waterfall. Put this in the list as well. Actually, I'd rather have details. We can sort it by name, or actually we'll do type after name. We don't want those meta files. Same thing with I. Do view details. Sort that down. All right, we'll go ahead and save. So we want this to be a waterfall, and it's going to be mapped to key 2. Next step, we've selected this, it's on our inspector. We'll want to change the number of frames to 0, get rid of all those pre-existing frames, and make this inactive, as well as increment the index of the element by 1, so it'll be 1 in this case. All right, so now I want to make a couple new folders for our new elements. We'll call this one I, and I'll call this one waterfall. I'm going to open this up in Windows Explorer. We'll start by adding our waterfall. Like I was saying, we don't want those meta files, so we'll just start with our actual PNGs here. Gonna go ahead and shift click the last one, and we'll copy them over. It's going to take a second once we switch back to Unity to import these, and we'll just give it a sec there. All right, there's all our waterfalls. Now to get these onto our waterfall element here, we're going to want to use the lock button, because we're going to be selecting these images. Now you see, as I select them, the inspector doesn't change, because this is locked. If I were to unlock this, whatever's selected is going to go here. So you see I select the waterfall, the inspector changes. I choose this element, I can choose the water, and it swaps. But what we want is to select our waterfall element and lock it. And we're going to drag down to the Animate Tiled Texture section here. What I'm going to do is, I can use this slider to get them into more of a list style. I'm going to do a similar thing. I'm going to shift click all these elements, and we're going to drag them over here to the Animate Tiled Texture script. Just so they all get dropped in order, 164 frames. I believe I'm going to want to make that run at about 24 frames a second. We'll start with that, how about? I'm going to do a similar thing with the eye now. We got our eye. We'll open this in Windows Explorer. And we'll go over to our source folder here. Start with 40. In my case, I started with the number 40. scroll all the way down to 90, control click and drop them in here, and we'll let Unity load that up. Cool, so that's all loaded in, and we'll do a similar operation here on our I element. Select this, unlock, lock, we know we're on I now. 0 frames, collapse that. Select all of our I frames here, drag them in, and we'll have 51. And this will probably, yeah, we'll do similar, 24 seconds. Alright, so now we have multiple elements to work with. You can swap between elements by pressing your keyboard key. So in this case, we'll be defaulting to Y, because if we unlock this, make sure you unlock when you're done too. Forget to do that. You can see with our I element, or rather our city element is going to be active, our I element is inactive, our static pattern is active, and our waterfall is inactive. So we'll be starting with the city and the static, as you saw before. Now if I wanted to though, I can press, when I'm in here, I can press U, and you'll see we fade over to my I element. And we still have the static going now, but maybe I want the waterfall. I can press 2. See, now you see that the static went away and we now have a waterfall. So the idea behind this is, as you press keys, it turns the other elements inactive and makes the one you switch to active. The other thing to note that's a little complex is the last selected element that you swap to, if it's music reactive, you can do a few things with it after that in a live setting. You can do things like change the sensitivity of how it animates. You can see that here with what I'm calling the division intensity. There's division intensity buffer and division intensity. So those numbers, the higher they are, the less of the effect that you'll see. So let's go ahead and press start and I'll kind of show you what I mean. So let's say we want to do this for our waterfall. We've pressed 2, so the waterfall is now active, as you see, and it's the last selected one. So now we can start to operate over it, right? If I press up and down on my keyboard key, you'll see this number as I press up, this number goes down. So that's going to make the effect more intense. But maybe I don't want it to be so intense. I can press down, and the effect becomes less present. This number goes up, the number we're dividing by. So you have to press it a lot to really, you could make it extremely subtle if you press down a lot. The other thing to note is we have a buffer on here. Right now you can turn off that buffer, and you'll see that it's a little bit jerkier, but it's going to be a little bit more accurate to exactly what the music's doing, but the buffer will kind of smooth it out. So those numbers move in tandem together as you press up and down on your keyboard, and then it's actually the right bracket key that's mapped to the buffer. So you can turn on and off the buffer, and you can change the intensity at which it divides at. Now if you want to see any of the default buttons, you can go into your project settings and check the input. So we have up, which is on the up key, down, which is on the down key. Flipping the buffer, that's what I was talking about. That key is mapped to the right bracket here. You could map it to something else if you want. And then the other things to note are drive bass, drive treble, and drive mids. So the last element that you've selected, you can change whether it reacts to the bass, the mids, the treble in the song by pressing a button. In the case of the bass, it's your return or enter key. For treble, by default, it's your backspace key. And then for mids, it's the right control button. So I can kind of show you guys what I'm talking about there. We'll do it with the static. Right now it's reacting to 3, 4, and 5 channel. Those are the mids, but I could press backspace. Well, first I'll have to select static pattern to make sure it's the last selected element. And so now that it's been selected, I can press backspace and change it to treble. You see here it's on 5, 6, and 7. It's going to be reacting to the treble. But what about bass? You can press right on the control key, and now you see it starts to react to the bass. Or rather the mids, excuse me, 3, 4, and 5. The bass is return or enter. Press that, and now we're reacting to the bass, 0, 1, and 2. So that's how you swap between elements. I can press 2 now to switch to the waterfall. And now that I did that, I can do some similar things. I can make this react to the bass by pressing enter. Let's go ahead and switch to the waterfall so you can see what I'm doing here. I can press backspace to go to treble, or right control to switch to mids. And of course I can turn it up and down to change the sensitivity, or see that number. Or I can press my right bracket to turn off the buffer, or turn it back on. So you have a lot of options there, and that's kind of some of the affordances that you're given in Smoke Show to change how your elements react to music. All right, so that's pretty much a lot of the functionality you're going to want to know about there. The most important thing beyond that is that you have your audio peer element here. And by default, that's coming with the Busy Bed song that is bundled in this repo. But what you could do is you could add more music. I have that in the audio folder here, right? What you would do is you could click here, and any other audio that you have available, you could select so you could work off of a different song than the one that I've provided for you. Additionally, you can also work off of live audio by using like a microphone or live audio input. A microphone would work. I've also used USB audio interfaces pretty well, and you could get a feed from a live band even. So what you want to do if you're trying that out, you would click this live audio checkbox. So instead of working off of this track, if you click this, you're going to work off of whatever microphone input you have available on your computer. If you're into code at all, I can kind of show you real quick. That is going to be mapped to the first microphone device that Unity can find. That's index position 0. So if you want to modify that behavior, you can change the code, but otherwise, if you have a microphone available, it'll grab the first one, and it needs to be matched properly to the frequency of your microphone, right? And so the important thing here is if you're not at 44,100, you want to change that value. I'm not going to go too much further into live audio, but that's just something to note, that you do have the capability of using live audio rather than like an MP3 or something like that. The final thing you want to do here is if you're interested in building this and actually running your own version rather than what you have through the Unity editor, you'll go ahead and File and Build and Run. It's going to build a resources folder, and I'll be showing you guys how to do a Windows build. You could also do an OS X or Linux build as well, though I haven't tested and developed in those environments, just to note. So that went ahead and made a build file. Actually, instead of doing build and run, I'll show you the manual way of doing it. You go to build settings, which using Windows here, 64-bit default, and I'm going to go ahead and make a build. We're going to make it in this folder viz here, and we're going to call it viz.exe. Actually, let's make another builds folder, new folder, call it new build, go in here, save. And Unity's going to go ahead and build all that for you. Cool. So now we have an executable, right? And so what we can do is we can double click here to run it. And what we're going to do is we're going to change the display here. I made it a little bit lower resolution just so everybody can see the stuff that's going on real easily. And you can change the input if you want. I've actually changed it to Xbox 360 controllers in the past. It's kind of fun, a little more fun than using your keyboard. You'll still want to use your keyboard to switch between the elements, but you can do things like change the sensitivity and the buffer and the treble, mids, and bass operations through like a joystick or something like that. So go ahead and hit play. And it's very similar to what happens in the editor. Just going to want to give it sometimes a few minutes to load the assets. In this case, we don't have too many, so it happens pretty quickly. But like right now, I might want to switch to my waterfall, or I might want to go back to static, right? So just like we do in the editor. And now my static, I think, is I want to turn off the buffer. I don't want to turn down the sensitivity. And another thing I'd like is maybe to switch to the witch's eye. But the treble doesn't seem to be as, or the static doesn't seem as present now. So maybe I can switch back to the static, and I can turn up the sensitivity. So now you can see it starts coming in a lot more. So yeah, I don't know. You can switch between elements, kind of try all different things, and of course, it's free and open source, so you can feel free to make any sort of modifications you'd like, do anything you want with it, really. I'm excited to see people try out some new stuff, and hopefully people have fun and find the software pretty intuitive. But yeah, don't forget, if you have any questions, you can reach out to me at vampirecomputerpeople@gmail.com. You can open up an issue in GitHub or hit me up on Twitter, any number of ways. I hope you guys have fun using it and hope this tutorial was informative. Thanks. Have a good day.